I mentioned it briefly on my live stream last Sunday, and it's spreading. At the beginning of the new school year, the British are concerned with a literal sign of decay. 150 now school buildings have to close due to the risk of collapse because cheap concrete was used. Blame is the austerity course of the then finance minister and today's prime minister. But Sunak denies this. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has denied the allegations of a scandal over dilapidated UK schools. Sunak has denied allegations that he cut a school rehabilitation program when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, despite knowing the risks of faulty concrete used in the construction. A former senior education ministry official, Jonathan Slater, had accused Sunak on BBC Radio of deferring an application for funding to other schools when he was finance minister. The Department of Education should have upgraded up to 400 schools a year, but only had funding for 100, Slater said. In 2021, when Sunak was Chancellor of the Exchequer, so finance minister, there was only money available for 50 schools. Sunak told reporters that Slater was completely wrong. More than 100 schools, people are talking about 150 now, in which the corresponding type of concrete has been installed in the past few decades, are now to keep the affected buildings closed. There is a risk of collapse due to the use of this concrete. And Sunak emphasized that 95% of the approximately 22,000 English schools were not affected. According to this calculation, the number of schools affected would be more than 1,000. The corresponding material was used extensively for the construction of schools and colleges from the 1950s to the 1990s. In 2018, after authorities have identified the potential risk of collapse over time, the ministry alerted schools that action was needed to reduce the danger. At the end of last month, the British Ministry of Education announced that rooms and buildings in dozens of schools had to be closed due to the risk of collapse. The government pledged financial support to the schools to carry out the most urgent work. However, trade unions and opposition parties, among others, have criticized the government's handling of the issue. They accused them of acting too late. But Sunak isn't the only one in the headlines on this special subject. The British Minister of Education actually commented on building defects in school, but one thing sticks in the mind of the people that saw the interview: her swearing. An embarrassing glitch happened to British Education Minister Gillian Keegan during a television interview. The Conservative politician answered questions about those dangerous construction defects in schools with the ITV broadcast on Monday. The topic has been occupying the British media for days at the start of the new school year. As soon as the interview was over and the camera was still rolling, she began to complain. Does anyone ever say you did a damn good job because everyone else sat on their ass and didn't do anything? What Keegan probably did not expect, the broadcaster published this statement. A short time later, she apologized in another interview for her language. It was a spontaneous statement. She did not want to elaborate on who she had accused of inaction. Actually, it was the reporter's fault, who gave her the feeling that she was solely to blame for the misery, Keegan said. Well, Great Britain's Prime Minister had imagined it all so beautifully even before that. After returning from a family vacation in sunny California, Rishi Sunak set out to hustle the Labour opposition with a series of initiatives: preventing the arrival of boat people across the English Channel, tackling crime. Well, something new every week for Labour to work through. However, the plan went horribly wrong, and not only with the school stuff. Sunak's luxury holiday in the US, second home, reminded Britons that their Prime Minister is a multi-millionaire while the country suffers from high electricity, food and rent costs. And the questionable Tory project against some of the world's damned under the motto "Stop the Boats" was to be tackled by transporting hundreds of refugees onto the Bibi Stockholm, a kind of a giant prison ship. According to Tory claims, the allegedly angry taxpayers should thus be spared accommodation costs. But first of all, 39 newcomers were able to enter the Bibi. After just 2 days, they had to be evacuated again because of the risk of Legionella on board. And Sunak's ruthless Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, an ambitious right-winger in the cabinet, wants to score points by ordering the police to punish every smallest offense without exception, of course without additional staff or sufficient resources. And the government's fight for favorable headlines initially failed miserably. Despite its own inaction, Labour's lead in the polls continues to fluctuate between 14 and 21 percentage points. And the latest blow was the start of school last week. After the pandemic period and the associated cancellation of classes, many children and their parents received the news that the roofs of a number of school buildings were in danger of collapsing, as I said in the beginning of the video, because of this aging concrete, and that learning there was not safe. And Gillian Keegan tried to offer consolation by saying that she herself has done everything she could. And the otherwise tight-fisted Treasury Secretary or Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, has promised emergency aid, but only a few believe him. The loss of credibility goes back to the unfortunate Brexit decision and its economic and political consequences. Prime Minister Sunak is unable to curb the sharply anti-European stance of a powerful minority in the Tory group, partly because he himself had agitated against remaining in the EU, partly because of weakness. Instead of dealing with the EU haters in his own ranks and beating them in the face with a deep deficit in the trade balance, Sunak surrounds himself with easygoing yes-men like the new Defence Secretary Grant Shapps. It's his 5th government job in 12 months, but he understands little of the problems in his portfolio, from military aid to Ukraine to costly and complex procurement projects. Shapps is all the more loyal to the boss. Similarly, the problem lies with Shapps' successor as Minister for Energy Security and Climate Neutrality, Claire Coutinho. Here, the green paint that the Conservatives wanted to give themselves is quickly peeling off because of the interests of the gas and oil industries. Right-wing hardliners among the Tories want to make a name for themselves with the unintelligent demand that climate activists like the supporters of Just Stop Oil, who obstruct smooth motor traffic, be locked up. And meanwhile, Sunak's opponent, Labour leader Keir Starmer, is using the reshuffle of his shadow cabinet to specify the course for possible elections to the House of Commons in the coming year. Starmer's new deputy, Angela Rayner, is to have her own ministry for levelling up. That means improving the situation in disadvantaged regions. Rayner succeeds Lisa Nandy, who was demoted to Shadow Foreign Aid Secretary, but she still hasn't given up just because of it. 2 friends of former Prime Minister Tony Blair were also considered by Starmer. Liz Kendall will oversee the jobs and pensions portfolio, coordinating Pat McFadden's Labour election campaign. And Tanguy Debonair is responsible for culture, media and sport, and Northern Ireland goes to the veteran Hilary Benn, so Labour retains the initiative. Sunak is indeed in deep trouble with all of this, and that will probably only have one effect, as we have seen in recent months. They will probably just become more extreme. And I'm quite sure that we will see in the next weeks how this will develop, but I am afraid that that will just mean getting more extreme or becoming more extreme. Sometimes my English is terrible, but try to make a 15-minute video in German if you're British, for example. It's not that easy in a different language. Nevertheless, I mentioned my live stream in the beginning. Next Sunday is another live stream, so you will see what topics are on the list then. If you want to see something else right now, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.